in the hushed forests of the Ise Peninsula stand Japan's most sacred religious sanctuaries, embodying spiritual and aesthetic attitudes whose roots extend back to the dawn of Japanese civilization. These shrines, the grand shrines at Ise, have survived the long centuries of history in a form virtually unchanged since their beginnings. Although established at Ise more than 14 centuries ago, the shrine buildings today appear as clean and fresh as if newly constructed. And so they are. For due to a curious practice of thoroughly rebuilding the shrines every 20 years, they remain eternally new, and their architectural form has survived since remote antiquity. Adjacent to the principal shrine buildings is a flat, empty area, the so-called alternate site, where the new buildings are to be erected as precise facsimiles of the present shrine. When the construction of the new shrine is completed and the buildings consecrated, the old buildings will be removed to lay open a new alternate site to await the next rebuilding 20 years hence. In this process, carried on at regular intervals since the 7th century, the architecture of these ancient Shinto shrines has been transmitted until the present day. In October 1973, the rebuilding and rededication of the Ise shrines was accomplished for the 60th time in Japanese history. Visiting Ise in 1936, the renowned German architect Bruno Taut exclaimed that the shrines share with the Parthenon the topmost peak of world architecture. Standing in ruins overlooking Athens, the Parthenon reminds us of the glory of a civilization long vanished from the earth. The sanctuaries at Ise, however, are always new. Preserved exactly in the form in which they originated, they offer modern man a living connection with the worlds of the ancient Japanese people. Ise is actually comprised of two shrine complexes: the inner shrine, dedicated to the goddess of the sun, and the outer shrine, in which the deity of grain cultivation is venerated. Both are believed to have been established early in the 7th century. Documents preserved in the Shoso-in, the great imperial storehouse built in Nara in the middle of the 8th century, record such practical matters as the ordering of gold for the rebuilding of the Ise shrines 1,000 years ago. Other official documents, bearing the date 804, record precisely the measurements and layout to be followed in rebuilding the shrines. The shrines today remain almost exactly as specified in these ancient documents. In the form of the Ise buildings, one can trace an architectural development with origins far older than the shrines themselves. One of the characteristic features of the style are the tall posts at the gable ends of the buildings that seem to support the ridgepoles. The surface decoration of this bronze bell-shaped object of the 2nd century AD reveals prototypes in the design of ancient storehouses for grain. For prehistoric agricultural people, a granary like this one symbolized communal unity and gradually took on religious connotations. Architectural historians have reconstructed as precisely as possible certain types of ancient Japanese buildings. In this recreated prehistoric village, one can see both the low pit dwellings and the raised floor storehouses for grain. In its general form, the granary resembles the elevated shrine buildings at Ise. A single tree trunk was hewn to serve as a staircase up to the raised floor. Similar construction techniques were used in the Shosoin at Nara, built in the 8th century as a storehouse for the documents and treasures of the imperial court. At Ise, the Mecca Den, or Hall of Daily Offerings, retains most exactly many of the features of the prehistoric granaries. The same single-log staircase is used to ascend to the raised floor. The building also has the roof support pillars that were seen on prehistoric bronze objects. Other shrine buildings at Ise also show many of the ancient elements of Japanese architecture. This bronze mirror, excavated at a tomb near Nara, reveals additional prototypes for the Ise shrines. It is decorated with relief images of 4 types of ancient thatch roof structures. Two of them have raised floors with balconies, apparently indicating that they were the dwelling place of a deity or an exalted person. At Ise, while all the shrine buildings are of the raised floor type, only the main sanctuaries are surrounded by balconies, thus distinguishing them as the abode of the deities enshrined within. These buildings possess a striking modernity that belies their great antiquity, and the clean simplicity of their lines has spoken eloquently to viewers of all times and all cultures. The buildings are made of smooth Japanese cypress wood, left in its pure natural state, without paint or finish of any sort. Piercing the thatched roofs are the crossed rafters, characteristic of prehistoric Japanese dwellings. Though no longer serving any structural function, they have been retained at Ise, perhaps to impart a symbolic value and dignity to these sacred buildings. Thus was the Ise style developed, combining structural features of prehistoric dwellings and granaries with the balconies and symbolic roof decorations of ancient palaces. The result is an architectural style that is indeed true to its Japanese name, Yuitsu Shinmei Zukuri, unique, fit for the divine, and classic in the enduring simplicity of its proportions. For centuries, the beautiful cypress wood used to rebuild the shrines was cut from the hills and mountains surrounding Ise. But as nearby supplies of this fine wood dwindled, shrine carpenters had to seek further away for their materials. In recent centuries, the wood has been cut from the Kiseo mountains of Nagano and Gifu prefectures, and today a part of that region has been designated a national forest, where majestic trees are cultivated specifically for use in rebuilding the shrines. The quantities of wood required for the undertaking are staggering. It is no exaggeration to say that entire forests must be readied for use in the construction. Each rebuilding consumes well over 13,000 fully grown trees. The largest of them measure nearly 5 feet in diameter and may be 600 or 700 years old. Although the actual construction work takes place rather rapidly, the wood must be prepared, cut, labeled and aged for as long as 5 years before the rebuilding begins. The great cypress logs are cut into boards or columns at special workshops and are stored in huge sheds not far from the shrines. Most of the construction techniques adhere closely to age-old traditions, but certain modern innovations, such as the use of electric power tools, have been introduced in recent years. The surface of each piece of wood is painstakingly finished by hand. Worked with a plane rather than sanded, the surface is as smooth to the touch as silk. Each fine joint is likewise cut by hand, using the traditional tools and techniques of master Japanese carpenters. After they are cut and shaped, all wood sections are wrapped in paper to prevent their being soiled in the drying and construction processes. When the time has finally come to begin assembling the new shrine buildings, a scaffolding covered with reed mats is erected on the empty site adjoining the existing shrine. Construction begins with the digging of holes in which the supporting posts and pillars will be set. At the bottom of each hole is laid a large foundation stone. Pillars are pulled one by one from the drying sheds to the construction site along tracks laid for this purpose behind the shrines. huge round pillars are slowly hoisted upright, and their bases firmly embedded in the holes that had been prepared for them. The largest of them, the Munamochi Bashira, or ridgepole support pillars, are 2.5 feet in diameter. While the massive pillars are held upright by ropes, a framework of horizontal beams is assembled at their base. The joints of each beam have been carefully cut in advance to fit securely into the upright pillars and to interlock tightly with each other. To retard the rotting of the pillars where they're embedded in the earth, a special mixture of red clay and lime is packed tightly around the base of each of them. Once the pillars have been securely positioned, the frames of the doorways are assembled and the walls are ready to be put together. Wall boards are fitted snugly into pre-cut grooves in each pillar. After the walls of the building have been set in place, huge beams are hoisted up and laid across the tops of the pillars. They are joined together without the use of a single nail or clamp. Next, the cross beams are added, and in some of the buildings, additional rafters are laid above the cross beams. Ancient though these techniques may be, Each successive step is planned with forethought and careful logic. Each new step in the construction depends upon the successful completion of the preceding one. Indeed, can this process really be called construction? One might better consider the entire structure assembled like a fine cabinet, using techniques of joinery rather than construction. Beam fits securely into pillar and cross beam into beam in an interlocking arrangement that is as secure as it is supremely reasonable. Once the rafters and roof supports have been secured, the gable boards are fixed at either end of each building. Above them are placed the rafter beams that extend upward like horns above the buildings. These rafters, called chinyi, are among the distinguishing features that identify the Ise style. Most probably, they were directly derived from the poles tied together by ropes that supported the roof walls of Japan's most ancient pit dwellings. The roof of each building is assembled in several steps. In setting the rafters and underroofing, nails come into use for the first time in the entire construction process. These nails have been forged in traditional fashion, strictly following the specifications of size and shape that are prescribed in the ancient documents, followed by generation after generation of shrine craftsmen. In the hills surrounding Ise, hundreds of acres have been devoted to cultivating the special miscanthus reeds used in thatching the roofs of the shrine buildings. Even so, more than 5 years are spent growing and preparing the more than 25,000 sheafs of reeds that are needed for the thatch. The reeds are cut every year during the midwinter dry season and are prepared for thatching in an elaborate process. First, they are smoked in ovens burning fresh green pine branches. Then the reeds are carefully sorted and collected into sheafs in preparation for thatching. They're cut to different lengths according to the section of the roof where they're to be used. Certain smooth reeds are cut and formed into a type of matting called jabara. The jabara is used to cover the surface of the thatch under the eaves, the under section of roof that is visible if one looks up toward the eaves. Sections of jabara matting are carefully cut and shaped to fit precisely over those parts of the thatch that they're designed to cover. After the jabara has been set in place, the thatching begins. Bundles of reeds are tied securely to the roof with hemp cord. So neatly are the jabara and thatch applied that one might almost say that the roofs of the Ise buildings are sewn rather than constructed. The work starts at the bottom of the roof and progresses upward as layer is laid upon layer, resulting in a fine, thick thatch. The uppermost layers of thatch are tucked tightly under the ridge board running the full length of the roof. This thatching technique, which is unique to the Ise shrines, was perfected by generations of skilled roofing craftsmen, and it accounts for the distinctive appearance of the roofs of the shrine buildings. The Mecca Den, or Hall of Daily Offering, located at the northeast corner of the outer shrine, is the one building at Ise that preserves most exactly the ancient construction techniques. Whereas the walls of other Ise buildings are supported by columns, the Mecca Den is constructed without them. Instead, the boards of the walls interlock tightly at the corners in log cabin fashion. This is accomplished by joinery techniques of the greatest precision. So tightly do the wall boards fit together that not even a piece of paper can be slipped between them. this building, it is the walls themselves that support their own weight, as well as the weight of the roof. Thus, the 60th reconstruction of the Ise shrines progresses step by step through the spring and summer. Finishing touches are applied to the buildings as the massive project approaches completion. In keeping with the awe-inspiring simplicity of the overall conception of the Ise shrines, decorative elements are kept to a minimum. The doors of certain buildings, however, are adorned with decorations cut of sheet gold. The balconies of the main sanctuaries are similarly embellished with gold and with jewel-like colored ornaments that are thought to have been derived from Chinese origins. October 2nd draws near, the day designated for the consecration of the new shrines and the transfer of the deities from the old buildings to the new. Complete and perfect in every detail, the new shrines stand empty and waiting. The area around the buildings has been spread with clean white stones, carried by the thousands from nearby riverbeds by devout worshippers. Reinforcing the sense of immaculate purity that pervades the sacred precincts, the white stones heighten the brilliance of the fresh natural wood and surround the shrines with an aura of lightness and spirituality. Ancient in form, but glistening in their newness, these sacred buildings express the very essence of Shinto values, giving visible form to the imperatives of purity, simplicity, and reverence for nature that lie at the heart of the most ancient religious beliefs of Japan. The sanctity of the space is enclosed by multiple fences. Once the deities have been installed in the new sanctuaries, only priests who have undergone special purification rites will be allowed to pass through the gates and enter the area within the fences. Silent. The shrines stand isolated from the world around them. What is it about the shrines at Ise that has proved so compelling and so enduring for the Japanese spirit? Other forms of religious architecture have arisen to house the spirits of the land. Later shrines have been built on a far grander scale, larger, more ornate, and more imposing. But none has replaced Ise as the abode of Japan's most sacred gods, and none can rival the depth of emotion inspired in worshippers who are drawn there. It is to Ise that one always returns, as if to the birthplace of arts or the fountainhead of truth. It is from the soft, clean texture of its cypress wood and from the warmth of its thatch that one comes to appreciate the unadorned elegance of natural materials. It is at Ise that one comes fully to comprehend the quiet harmony of man and nature. It is from the space and proportions of these buildings, so artless and yet so perfect that they seem to have grown from the warm earth like a flower or a tree, that one perceives the measure of life. It is at Ise that one glimpses the divine.